Are you looking for inspiring conversations about faith, film, and life? You're in the right place. Here's the host who knows the right questions to ask, Father Edward Looney.
Hey everybody, it's Father Edward. Grateful you're tuning in for another conversation. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to having for a long time. We've been going back and forth for a few months, but anybody that follows my content, anybody that follows the podcast knows that I love pilgrimage, so much so that I wrote a little book on pilgrimage called Places of Grace. My visits to Catholic shrines, chapels, graves, and monasteries, and the graces I received, that as we pray at these holy sites, that we receive so much from the goodness of God. And that's what I want to share, my own kind of memoir, in a sense, of pilgrimage. And there's another young lady from the Diocese of Green Bay who is doing pilgrimages all over the country and probably even the world, I would guess. But I came to know of her a few years ago when The Compass, the diocesan newspaper, was still a thing. She was actually one of the front page articles just about her as a high school student launching in her college years. She had a podcast when she was at Benedictine University. And so just kind of promoting it, the Everyday Saint, I followed it. I still get the downloads. I listen to them every now and again, especially when it's a topic that interests me, like these pilgrimage ones you've been doing. So I thought I want to talk about pilgrimage. She's very present on Instagram as well. Her name over there is Eve Rosemary, or the Everyday Saint as well. So you could probably find her both ways. But I'm looking forward to the conversation. So thanks so much, Eve, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Father Edward. I'm really excited. And yes, as you mentioned, I've been able to go to a lot of different shrines recently. So I'm excited to share about that and also share about my ministry with the Everyday Saint.
Yeah, and what we've been talking about too, before we start recording here, is that right now during the summer, you're doing the social media for the Shrine and Champion. And the first thing you said to me before we started was, you said, yeah, I'm working at the Shrine and Champion this summer. And I said, are you doing their social media? Because it really seems like they've upped their game. And so if you follow the Champion Shrine on Instagram or Facebook, maybe you've seen that too. So you're the person with some of the creative ideas behind that. And yeah, it's wonderful. So good work on that, and great work spreading the Shrine and Champion, the place that you described as the most, like the most likely place to experience Mary's presence, or the most powerful presence of Mary. There are lots of Marian shrines, a lot of them to devotional titles of Our Lady, but this is the only place that Mary appeared. So what's it like working at the Shrine and Champion?
Wow, it's amazing. I actually started working there just temporarily while I'm back home, but it was right after I'd been on this nationwide pilgrimage all over the country. I've traveled 20,000 miles in about 3 months, visiting shrines all over. And so I wanted to come back and be able to give back to the Shrine of Our Lady of Champion, because it means so much to me. I grew up actually going on field trips to Our Lady of Champion. I grew up in the Green Bay area. So grew up going on field trips, thought that everyone had a Marian apparition in their backyard. Turns out that's not true. But I just had such a deep devotion to Our Lady at this place. And that seems to be such a big point at Our Lady of Champion. Most people, their feedback is that they walk away feeling so full of peace after visiting. And isn't that what we're all seeking, right? Is the sense of peace, the sense of clarity. And it's so beautiful that we have this in the United States, that Our Lady cares for us in the United States too, that you don't have to travel across the world to experience the presence of God and experience the presence of Our Lady. Like, it is here, and she is with us always.
When you say 20,000 miles, is that in car, or is that airline miles, or is that a mixture of both?
That is purely car. I road tripped my parents joined me for a couple parts of it because I'm 21 years old. They're definitely needed a little bit of help at times. But for the most part, in those 3 months, it was all in the car by myself, lots of podcasts listening to, lots of audiobooks to keep me occupied as I traveled to these different shrines. And I was simultaneously speaking too. So my main ministry is as a chastity speaker. So how I coordinated that this last spring was that I would pinpoint these shrines across the country, go to the shrine, feature them on the Everyday Saint podcast and the Everyday Saint YouTube. And then while I was in the area visiting those shrines, then I would reach out to the churches there, the schools there, and then go in and speak to their teens about chastity and pure relationships.
So do you travel with all of this podcast equipment then and cameras in order to record those interviews? You're doing them at the shrine?
Yes, I've been doing them at the shrine. So my car, I finished the tour itself at the beginning of April. So for those 3 months, though, my car was packed with inventory for the Everyday Saint. I have some lifestyle products that I am able to sell while I'm at these events. They're actually my original paintings that I've turned into products. So I have that, but then also my podcast equipment. So I had to get some travel microphones. I have a camera with me that I bring everywhere. Actually, most of the footage that I was able to get, I got on my iPhone and carried around one of the filming sticks with me while I went around, and then was just able to meet a lot of cool people who sat down with me and discussed the history of the shrine, the message of the shrine, miracles that have happened at these places all across the country.
Yeah. And how did people find out that you're a chastity speaker? Are you sending out emails or messages to different schools or universities, or how are they finding you?
Because of the Everyday Saint podcast is a large part about how people have kind of found me. We also did a lot of cold calling, but I've had this idea and this mission to be a chastity speaker since my sophomore year of college is really when I knew I wanted to take it seriously and knew that this was a career that I wanted to pursue, but not something that I could go apply for necessarily when I graduated college, like a normal job. It was something that I had to start working towards now. So I founded the Everyday Saint while I was still in college and began it as a podcast where I would interview other young Catholics because I was in Benedictine College, which is filled with these young people taking their faith seriously. I hadn't seen anything like that before, and I knew how isolated I felt in my faith journey when I was in high school. So then I started the Everyday Saint podcast, interviewing my college peers about their faith journey and helping other young people know that they're not alone in their journey of faith. And so because I've been doing that for 2 years, by the time I graduated this past December from college, I had built up a social media presence. I built that foundation that I could really take public speaking and make it my career.
Yeah. Wow. That's impressive. It's
Thank
incredible.
you.
You look at the social media, your followers, yes, that count. But just looking at the posts and the content you're creating and the fact that you're doing all that, it's really impressive and really good work. So,
Thank you.
tell us how many places and how many shrines would you say you've documented or focused on with this travel and with this project thus far?
Nearly 30 shrines, and that's just in the United States. So, and just in those 3 months too. So, I was able to go to almost 30 shrines, and I'm pretty much rounding out actually my content from the shrine tour. But the shrine content will actually continue, but in a different way. I was actually just in Washington D.C. this last week, and I am doing a whole series in conjunction with the National Shrine of Pope St. John Paul II. So even though I am not traveling to all these different shrines, although I was doing that for quite a few months, now it's that content is changing to feature this specific shrine, but mostly the message and legacy of Pope St. John Paul II, moral virtue, those moral questions that a lot of us have. So that content is actually going to start being produced this upcoming week.
Oh, wow. Incredible. So tell us, what about one of these shrines? Like which one? Let's exclude Champion because it's in a league of its own. But,
It is.
but what shrine maybe was the most powerful for you to walk into and experience and just to be there that maybe you had a powerful experience of prayer there?
Man, I have been asked this question a lot, and it's so hard to choose just one because I think each one had such different perspectives and devotions associated with it that really touched me in a lot of different ways. And that's part of the reason on my social media, you'll notice I did some shrine superlatives of like, this one is most likely to do this or most likely for that. And if you're looking for this, go to this shrine, just because it's like, I don't know how to choose just one, but I will highlight maybe one or two that really touched me. One of them was the Shrine of Divine Mercy. And that one, I love the devotion to the Divine Mercy image of Jesus. I think it's really profound and impactful, but also there they have larger than life size statues of the Stations of the Cross. And I thought that that was really profound to walk through, because you can look at like the faces of each of the characters throughout the Stations of the Cross. While I was going through that tour to the person that I was with, she just kept describing, like, look at Simon's face in this one and look at how different it was from the last one. And you can even see Simon in particular as he, is called to help Jesus carry the cross. He's kind of angry at first, and that's depicted in this statue. But then by the end, his face has changed from one of anger to one of like, what are you doing to this man? Like, what did he do? Like, kind of like this disgust, but not disgust towards Jesus, which was kind of his like confusion at the beginning of the Stations. And now it's turned into this disgust towards the soldiers of like, you can tell that Simon's been impacted by Jesus in this moment. And yes, that's the image.
Most
Yes.
most intimate encounter with Jesus is your superlative there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's because you're right there. And even in the picture that you just pulled up with that superlative that I had posted, it's the image of the Stations of the Cross, but where Jesus is getting nailed to the cross. And even the little detail in that, you look at it and you can see that Jesus is about to get nailed. One hand is right about to be nailed to the cross. The other hand, though, hasn't yet been nailed to the cross, but Jesus has it like ready to be nailed to the cross. Like he's already in the pose of the crucifixion, but like he's not fighting it at all is the point, that he's ready for it, that he's sitting there. His hands haven't been nailed yet, but he's in the position just ready to take on that mission and ready to die for our sins. So that's definitely why I gave that one. And then we were just talking about the Blessed Stanley Rother Shrine. I really enjoyed that one because it's a blessed, dedicated to a blessed who is very recent to our times. And I think any of those moments that you can connect sainthood to something that feels so near to you, the better. So I really experienced that at the Blessed Stanley Rother Shrine. I experienced that at the Monastery of the Angels, which is Mother Angelica's shrine that she built. She's also very recent. And then also the Mother Cabrini Shrine. While she's not quite as recent, it was, someone who was here in the United States who made a lasting legacy and impact on our country as we know it today.
When it comes to the Father Stanley Rother Shrine or Blessed Rother Shrine, just the fact that they built this shrine within our memory, like within the last 5 years. I was going to go to the dedication of it, and but then they moved the date, and the new date didn't work for me. But I was just really impressed that something so beautiful could be built in 2020 or whatever year it was. It's just impressive, just for that reason alone.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, and one of the things they told me while they were bringing me on a tour there was they mentioned that there was someone from Europe who had just visited, and while they were doing the tour, he was just like crying. He was like, thank you for building something like this, because even in Europe, they're not building things like this anymore. And if you know anything about, European churches, they're grand, they communicate God's majesty very well and his grandeur, and we just really don't get that in the United States. So to go to a place that was built within our lifetime, so it's massive, it is huge, and to know that we're still dedicated and devoting ourselves to Jesus and giving him, that due respect, that God deserves something that's so grand and so communicates his beauty so well.
Yeah, the superlative you used there was most likely to make you cry. That was the Stanley
Yes,
Rother Shrine. Yeah.
it
Uh,
was, yes.
you mentioned Mother Cabrini, and maybe you know this. there's like three different shrines to Mother Cabrini in the United States. So there's one in Chicago, and I love that little shrine in Chicago. I don't know if you've been there. It's really hard to find parking. There's really no parking lot. It's street parking. But it when I went in there, and I kind of had this preconceived impression in my head of what it was going to look like, because um, because someone had told me that it was in the basement of an old hospital, and like I just thought it was going to be some, place that wasn't dignified or glorified. And I walked in and I said, this is a place that really tells Mother Cabrini's story. And it was just very beautiful, and just kind of tucked away among the high rises, a very beautiful spot. So then there's Golden, Colorado, where there's the miraculous spring of water. And then there's the one probably in New York, and maybe that's where you went. So which one did you really spotlight?
I went to two out of those three. So I visited the Mother Cabrini Shrine in Golden, Colorado, and then the one in New York City. So coast to coast, which was really amazing because she touched so much of the United States. Was such an entrepreneur. She founded over 60 institutions in her lifetime, which she wasn't really even supposed to live past a certain age because of the complications with her health. So the fact that she was able to travel so much, do so much in her lifetime was really remarkable. And the New York City one is maybe some. I haven't been to the one in Chicago, but maybe similar. Is like it's in New York City, which is just hustle and bustle and busy, and people just look tired. And this shrine is just tucked away within this busyness. And I agree. I mean, that's where she's entombed. Actually, you can go and see her body, pray before her, ask for her intercession. And it's just amazing to get to know her in such a different way, like to really sit before her and reflect on all that she was able to do, the lives that she touched, and how, I mean, what you were just saying, even about the one in Chicago, how it's in the basement of a hospital. That would definitely communicate her story well, because she wasn't afraid to go to the places where people were afraid, or people were rejected, or people needed the most help, and just show as much compassion as she could.
So maybe detail a little bit. What do you do when you arrive at a shrine property? Like what's your process, and how do you go about appreciating it? Now, one of the reasons why I wrote my little book called Places of Grace was because I was really struck in Canterbury in England that we're at the martyrdom spot of St. Thomas More or St. Thomas Becket, and one of the two. And as you were at that spot, all these people were taking a picture, maybe taking a selfie, but like they weren't relishing it. They weren't appreciating it. They weren't bowing their head in prayer that there was a martyrdom that occurred there back so many years ago. And so, just tell us, how do you go about in a process of appreciating these shrines you visit?
Yeah, so I mean, I visited so many in such a short amount of time that sometimes I felt like I was just rushing from one to the next. But I think one of the biggest things that I learned is just that time to really like take and reflect and take in what you're doing. I had a similar experience a couple of years ago, actually, when I had studied abroad. I visited the Sagrada family, that church in Barcelona, Spain.
Yeah.
And I remember people were like posing in front of the altar, taking photos. And I was so angry actually at that, because I'm like, I don't think the tabernacle was there, but I was like, but I know what happens at that altar. I know that Jesus like sacrifices himself for us on that altar, and people are just like posing in front of it, just taking photos and not understanding the significance of this sacred space. And so then when we think of pilgrimage here, especially in the United States, a lot of times we can hop in our car and go drive a couple of hours and visit a shrine. There's a lot of places for the spiritual renewal. So when we go to these places, I think one is an openness. You don't know if there's going to be an answered prayer here, right? We don't know what God will reveal to us. And a lot of times we don't want to discount or discredit the spiritual growth that happens when we go on pilgrimage. A lot of times we to these places, I think, looking for answered prayers, looking for clarity. I know there's a lot of prayers that I brought before God at these places, and that's not bad to do, but to know that there's going to be graces that we receive that we either don't recognize or that we didn't expect. And so to go with an openness to what God wants to teach you, and then to go and leave a lot of time for silence, leave some time to walk around. There were a lot of shrines that is like, man, I wish I could have spent more time here, but I have to go to the next thing. So make sure that you can dedicate a good amount of time to go visit the sacraments. Look ahead of time to see what time their mass is, see what time confession is, see what time any other devotion that they have is. Try and plan your day around that, and to try to hit as many devotions as you can while you're visiting too, because I think there's a lot of grace to be offered in doing that. And then maybe do a little bit of research on the saint ahead of time, whether there's a lot of podcasts about saints. A lot of these shrines too are devoted to saints. So for example, you're just talking about the Blessed Stanley Rother shrine. So maybe before you go and visit that shrine, just look up in your podcast app Blessed Stanley Rother, and literally while you're on your way to the shrine, you could be listening to something about him or learning a little bit about that particular devotion or that particular saint. And I think that gives you a greater appreciation for the pilgrimage. And then write down about your experience after the fact so that you don't forget it, so that you remember the graces received from God. And maybe even in that reflection, you'll learn a little bit about the graces that you didn't quite pick up on while you were there, and are able to then reflect on later.
Yeah, I think you probably were the mastermind behind this, but the Champion social media account recently did like what to do in a day at Champion and kind of listed
Yeah,
like
that was me.
10 o'clock you do this, at 11 you go to mass, at 12 you picnic at the benches, at the picnic benches, and then it went on. And so you kind of gave a nice little rhythm. And if people are looking for a podcast about the Rother Shrine, they could just listen to the one that you just released too. So right.
Exactly, right. Right, yeah, exactly. If you are looking at going to a shrine, I probably went there.
Yeah.
So you can just look it up on the Everyday Saint podcast. And what I did with those episodes too is that I was able to sit down, usually with a chaplain, sometimes their director of communications, their executive director, usually people who have been there for quite some time. And the people who work at these shrines, I mean, they spend their careers, they dedicate their life's work to knowing more about this devotion. So they had some really amazing reflections that you can only get from spending day in and day out thinking about this place, thinking about how to explain that devotion to other people. So I had some really wonderful conversations with people. So not to toot my own horn, because it wasn't all me. It was mostly the featuring these stories. But there were just some really amazing stories to listen to and to learn from.
Obviously, you couldn't make it to all of the different places. So, are there some places that you want to go to that are on your this is my next list? So, for example, I mentioned to you I'm going to the Rother Shrine pretty quick here, and that's been on my list for a while. And I've actually looked at airfare on a Sunday night after I say my masses. Like, could I fly on a Sunday night, visit the Rother Shrine on Monday, fly back Monday evening or early Tuesday morning and get back to the parish? And like, that was just important to me that I wanted, it was so important that I wanted to do that. And so it just so happened that I had an open weekend come up where there's a missionary priest covering our masses because of the diocesan appeal that we have. And so, it meant that I could go there if I wanted. And so I chose that. I'm like, well, I've always wanted to go. And so let's go, let's do it. So, yeah, I guess any places you have in mind that you want to get to next.
There was one shrine that I wasn't able to visit because I think someone was out of town that I was supposed to be able to talk with, but there's, I'm blanking on the name, but it's a reliquary in Pittsburgh. And it's one of the biggest ones ever. And I would love to see that. There's also the Blessed Francis Xavier Sealos Shrine in New Orleans. And funny enough, my dad was with me in New Orleans. We visited 3 shrines that day. So like the St. Louis Cathedral, we went to Our Lady of
the Snows.
No, it actually wasn't that one. It was
Our Lady, the Perryville,
the Help or
Miraculous Medal in Perryville, Missouri.
No, it was in New Orleans.
Oh, New Orleans. Sorry, Prompt Succor. Then sorry.
Yes, Yes, that's exactly it. Yes,
And
so we went to both of
Ursuline
those
devotion.
places. Yes, yes, that's it. So we went to both of those, and then we were to go to the Blessed Francis Xavier Seelos Shrine. I did have an appointment with them. We weren't able to quite coordinate that with my travels and some other speaking opportunities that I had, but we wanted to just go and visit. But we forgot to look at what time they were open. So we went at like 3 o'clock, but they had just closed. So
Oh.
I wanted to get back there because I've heard really remarkable things about his story and also about that shrine.
Yeah, I did mosey around there once and pray there and everything. And yeah, it's a place I'd like to go back to. Not that I didn't appreciate it as much as I could have, but as you keep visiting these places, sometimes you do have that desire to go back, and
Yeah.
that's what I found. So, yeah, well, let's see. So each of these gift stores, they have a gift shop. So do you go in the gift shop? What are you looking for if you go in the gift shop?
I am a sucker for a Catholic gift shop. I had to budget my money on this tour to be like, Eve, you can't go into every single gift shop and buy something. It was a tough pill to swallow. But I always go in the gift shop. In particular, I like to look for their books. I'm a big um, book person. I studied theology in college, and now I'm finally able to get back into reading things that I enjoy, not just reading for school. So I've definitely looked at some of those, especially like the stories about the saint or the stories about that particular devotion. I find very interesting and inspirational because it's still the inspirational theology, but without like sometimes like the deep like Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologia, that like deep thought. It's like a story about a saint. So I really enjoy looking for those. I also love looking at Catholic art. If you went into my dorm room in college, it's a small space, but I put so much Catholic art in there. You couldn't turn one way without seeing something about Our Lady, seeing something with Jesus on it. So I always look for those too when I'm in the gift shops.
Yeah, that's great. Um, you also featured the Cathedral of the Madeleine in Salt Lake City, which I don't think is technically a shrine. Maybe it is, but what was so special about that place?
You're right, it's not a shrine. However, it was voted the second most beautiful cathedral in the United States. And I think it definitely lived up to that title. It was absolutely stunning, very colorful. There's a lot of angels in it. I was actually, another fun fact is that I was able to go with my mom to that shrine. She had been traveling with me for that leg of the tour, and one of her favorite saints is Saint Mary Magdalene. So it also held a little bit more devotion for my mom and I that I did want to go visit, especially while I was with her to that cathedral. And while I was there, not only was it really beautiful and really interesting to learn, especially in Salt Lake City, which is not known as a Catholic city by any means. It's definitely known more as like a Mormon population. So to have the second most beautiful cathedral in a place where there's not so many Catholics, I thought was really fascinating. And then I was also able to talk with someone who he had just started his journey in the priesthood. I mean, like, had just been like ordained just a few months prior to that, maybe 3 months prior to that. So then during our podcast episode, not only was I able to ask him about the cathedral, because that was something like a lot of new reflections for him, especially as a priest who was celebrating mass at the cathedral, but I was also able to ask him about his first time consecrating the Eucharist.
Hmm.
And that was amazing. I mean, like, he was tearing up sharing this story because it had been something that was so recent to him. So that was a really special cathedral that I was able to go visit while I was on the tour.
That's wonderful. Uh, I'm thinking about some of the other places you've been to. I saw St. John Neumann down in Philadelphia. So I was actually in Baltimore recently for a conference, and I intentionally flew into Philadelphia, knowing that Baltimore was only 2 hours from Philadelphia, because I wanted to go and pray at the St. John Neumann Shrine. I had been there once before, and I was just really moved by it. I'm like, I want to go back there. I want to pray there. And yeah, and of course it didn't disappoint. And actually, the day that I was there, I met a newly ordained priest who was there to give a mass of Thanksgiving and celebrate a mass
Oh,
of Thanksgiving.
whoa.
And we were able to connect afterwards and talk a little bit, and so it was impressive. And so yeah, that's just a place that holds a special spot. Just the story of John Neumann and how he came to America and how he served, and very heroic priest and bishop.
Yes, that one was really neat as well, especially because he's in the United States. Like he immigrated here and then spent most of his life serving here. He influenced the education system as we know it to be today. He was known for being a mission priest, really with the people. And something that really stuck out to me about that shrine when I was talking to Father Jack while I was there, he mentioned that when St. John had passed away, that usually when someone passes away, you start praying for them, right? For their soul, for them to be in union with God. But however, when St. John passed away, people started praying to him almost immediately. Like there was just a sense that this was someone who was really special, and his cause for canonization was opened very, very quickly because of that, because they saw that people were flocking to his grave, not to pray for his soul, but really to pray to him and ask for his intercession.
So for each of the places you visit, when you bring your petitions, when you ask that saint to pray for you, when you ask Our Lady to intercede, is it the same prayers and intentions, or do you notice that at each different place there's a different petition that kind of rises up from within you that you begin praying about or praying for at that place?
I really love that question because I think that there's something different about each shrine. Like, you're not going to ever have the same experience at a shrine. Each one you go to is devoted to something different and really communicates something different. And I think there's things that will resonate with you more at one shrine that won't resonate with you in the same way at a different shrine. And just as you pray there, as you reflect on things, I think God will reveal himself in new ways to your heart. And then that in itself brings up different petitions. Of course, there's some that are kind of standard petitions that I bring up all the time, prayers for your family, prayers for my ministry with the everyday saint. Those I mention at every single shrine. But then depending on what resonates with me at each shrine will bring up different devotion. So, for example, when I visited the St. John Newman Shrine, while I was there, I actually had visited about a year before that, so it was the second time I was able to visit that particular shrine. And the first time that I was there learning about St. John and his devotion to the Catholic education system, that particular day, I really was feeling called to pray for my brother, John, who was just going to be starting his freshman year of college a couple of months later. So, that for me resonated a lot more at that point than maybe the second time that I was visiting. That's funny now that I think about it, I was praying for my other brother, who has mentioned a couple of times that he would want to consider the seminary maybe in the future, would consider that route, which again, St. John is perfect for that too, because he had lived his life as a priest, especially as a priest who was very involved in young people's lives, which is definitely how I would see my youngest brother. So, even just within that year difference, it was the same shrine, two completely different petitions, but yet both really correlated to St. John in particular.
Yeah, well, that's very beautiful too. And yeah, there's all these different little stories and just how these graces come to us from these holy sites for sure. As we're talking about all these different shrines you visit, so you're a chastity speaker, and so I'm wondering, like, are you able to incorporate any of the experiences that you've had at these shrines and these experiences? Does that become a part of something within your ministry as a speaker that you're able to relate that then to other people?
I think it's definitely given me a lot of stories, and not my own story or own experience, but hearing the stories of these saints, I think in particular. I mean, my ministry is called the Everyday Saint, and it is intended so that people can understand that they have the potential for sainthood and that God has called us in particular ways. So something that really touched me while I was on this tour was learning about these different saints and learning about really like their paths to sainthood were so different from one another. Even thinking about, there's Saint Rita and Saint Therese of Lisieux, who both lived more quiet lives, if you will. I mean, they were contemplatives. They're known kind of for this life that maybe they didn't go and found a ton of institutions, but they had a deep love of God. So, you have their stories. And then you also have the Mother Cabrinis, the St. Elizabeth Ann Setons, who went out and they founded these institutions. They did the big things that were in the public eye that people knew about. And I mean, these were just a couple different saints that I learned about. So they gave really wonderful examples that sainthood looks different for every single person. And every single person is also called to that high level of this. This is the calling that God has for you. And if you love him, like, you're going to learn how to love him best and follow that mission. And that's what's going to lead to our ultimate fulfillment. And that's one of the biggest messages, I think, when I'm giving these chastity presentations, is that I try and form it in a way that we talk a lot about what authentic love is, and that the decision of chastity, it's not just about rules and regulations and saying no. The decision of chastity is actually about learning what love is and following that. And we know that God is love. So if we know that God is love and we start like focusing on that, that's where our fulfillment is. It isn't in this viewpoint of love is found completely and totally in this other person, that this other person is going to fulfill me, they're going to complete me. Only that fulfillment can be found in God. So I think that's one of the biggest life lessons that really changed my perspective, to be able to communicate that in a new way to these teens as I talk to them about what love truly is and what following God really looks like.
You know, someone like you who is faith-filled, a young adult, probably, your time in high school, some of your peers probably didn't share the same enthusiasm for the faith. So I'm wondering then, like, what do your peers think about, your trips to shrines, if they see it on social, or what do they think of your chastity work? Because obviously sometimes this is contra what a person might be living or experiencing themselves. Like they aren't living a chaste life like they should be. And so like your work is kind of uh, threatening to them in a sense, I would think. So what do friends from high school or peers or other people perceive about your work, I guess?
It's funny. I think that, well, I know that when I was in high school, I was known as the Jesus girl, even at my Catholic school. So I don't think that this path of life would be too shocking for most people who went to high school with me to see me out and speaking about this. Even when I was in high school, this was a concept that I grabbed quite easily. It made a lot of sense to me, this respect for the body, this respect for what authentic love is, what that looks like. Especially once I started taking my faith more seriously, this was just a concept that made a lot of sense to me right away. But that was not the case for most of my peers, and I recognized that very quickly in high school, that from the get-go I was having a lot of conversations about morality and about love and about dating, even with my classmates at that point. But then as I progressed through my education and started taking my faith more seriously, that change really started for me sophomore and junior year of high school. And actually, when I was in high school, I was set for a full ride scholarship at the University of Alabama. I was going to study international studies while I was there, go and work in the United Nations, be a peace building affairs officer was always my goal. And then once my faith really started taking root, I completely switched that, wanted to go study theology at Benedictine College, which is what I graduated with, my degree with. And once I started going from telling people that I was going to go study international relations, there was like this wow factor to it. Oh, she's going to go work in the United Nations. That's so cool. So I went from telling people that and like this impressed response to then telling them that I was going to go study Catholic theology, and I never had any idea what they were going to respond with from there. So I think I got a lot of practice from the get-go of, the response from people when I mentioned this might not always be the most understanding, or they might not quite know exactly what that means. But I would say most of the time when I share what my faith is, what my journey is, what I'm doing, even if someone doesn't necessarily believe the same things, I think there's this really beautiful tendency in the human person to appreciate when someone is passionate about something. So I think the way that I live my life is that I always lead with compassion. I always lead with love. And once you put two and two together, that I have this disposition because of faith, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that's kind of the feedback that I've gotten from coworkers who maybe aren't Catholic. Then they feel comfortable asking a lot of questions. Actually, I have had quite a few jobs in the secular world, especially throughout college, just like waitressing and whatnot, that all of a sudden, as I start just being myself and sharing my faith, that these questions naturally come about from the people that I'm working with. And it's not a a far off wonder to know that this is what I'm doing for a career.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you went to Benedictine in Atchison, Kansas. And so in the state of Missouri, maybe only an hour, hour and a half from Benedictine, I'm thinking, Sister Wilhelmina, this incorrupt nun at the Benedictine Sisters of Mary, Queen of the Apostles, she is encased. And so I'm wondering if you were able to make a trip there and pray in front of her remains.
I was not able to make a trip there, unfortunately. I know that when that all came out was during the summertime when I was back in
Ah.
Wisconsin. So I definitely heard a lot about it. Benedictine was producing a lot about her, which was so fascinating. Again, another example of sainthood coming really close to us. And I love the ways that God continues to communicate just how near He is to us, just how we have the capacity to love Him even more day in and day out. And I know a lot of the professors that I had went and visited her. The president of our college, President Minnis, and his wife, Mrs. Minnis, both went and were able to visit her entombed there. So it's really remarkable that we have something so near.
Yeah, you mentioned about the nearness of these people. So just where we live in the state of Wisconsin, there are a lot of different people we could go visit. We could visit the grave of Samuel Mazzucchelli in Benton, Wisconsin, venerable. There's somebody in Milwaukee, his name escapes me right now, but his cause is pretty defunct. So not, a holy person, except or it was a holy person, but just probably not going to be a venerable or a blessed or whatever. But then you have Blessed James Miller, buried near Stevens Point in a small village called Ellis. And then when you go towards Minnesota, you could go to Sister Anella. Sister Anella's tomb was, or her cause was just put forward by the diocese, approved by the USCCB for possible sainthood. So there are all of these possible sainthood causes that are really right around us. So when you said earlier that you could get in the car and go 2 or 3 hours and find something, you weren't lying. You really
No,
could.
you really can.
And even if you don't live in Wisconsin, if you're listening in California, you have the missions, you have a lot of saints around the California area. In Detroit, there's Solanus Casey. So there's just so many people and shrines to Our Lady, like in Cary, Ohio, the Shrine of Our Lady of Consolation, or Holy Hill down in southern Wisconsin. So there are all of these places that we can visit and that we can really experience the power of God and the intercession of the saints and Our Lady. And yeah, I love visiting these places much as you do.
Yes, it's really wonderful. I mean, it's crazy to think just how close a lot of these places are that you can hop in, do day trips with your family too, bring your kids to these places. That was one of my big reflections is like a lot of times kids aren't welcome in a lot of places or don't seem like they are, but like you can bring your kids to these places and they're also going to be able to appreciate it as well and just see how close sainthood really can be to us.
Yeah, our time's running short now, and so just maybe tell people how they can find you, if there's a website, Instagram, all your handles, all the different ways that maybe they want to learn more about some of the work you've been doing with Everyday Saint.
Yes, so you can learn all about my shrine tour on the Everyday Saint podcast. That is wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere I featured all of these shrines. And you'll also be seeing that Pope St. John Paul II content coming very soon. I'm upping to actually 2 episodes a week versus just 1 episode. So there's going to be some solo episodes, guests, the series on John Paul II. So there's a lot that's coming up very quickly here. And then you can check out my website at theeverydaysaint.com. That also features a couple blog posts from my experience, a list of all the shrines that I went to. But then also, if you're interested in having me come in and speak to your youth group, your school, any youth organization you're part of, I give chastity presentations to 7th through 12th grade students. So you can inquire there, learn a little bit more about my journey. And then I'm also very active on social media, particularly on Instagram, which is theeveryday.saint.
Wonderful. Well, give her a follow, give her a listen. I'm very grateful that you're helping to make everyday saints in the world today through your witness, through pilgrimage, through all the content you're sharing. So thanks so much, Eve Rosemary, for joining me today.
Yes, thank you for having me, and God bless you to all the listeners.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. And don't forget to stay up to date with what Father Edward is doing by following him on Facebook, X, or Instagram at the handle @FrEdwardLooney. Thanks for listening, and please join Father Edward again next time for another inspiring conversation.